All right, get this. Today's deep dive is about building a better heart. Not metaphorically speaking, like in a self-help kind of way, but an actual functioning artificial heart, specifically a new type of left ventricle simulator.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is the approach. This isn't about clunky metal parts. We're talking soft robotics and a deep dive into the mechanics of the heart itself. We'll be looking at excerpts from Science Robotics, specifically a research article all about a soft, robotic artificial left ventricle, or LV for short.
And when you say deep dive, you mean it. I dug into the source material you sent, and we're talking some serious biomimicry here. They're using these things called hydraulic filament artificial muscles, or HFAMs, and actually arranging them to mirror how muscle fibers are laid out in a real heart. That's wild.
It's remarkable, and it addresses a major bottleneck in cardiovascular research. Traditionally, if you wanted to test a new heart valve design or a new surgical technique, your options were limited.
You're talking about animal testing.
Exactly. It's costly, time-consuming, and obviously raises ethical questions. The idea that we could have high-fidelity heart simulators, it's a potential game changer for how new treatments are developed.
Okay, so that's the why this is a big deal. But the article mentions other attempts have been made at artificial hearts. What makes this one so different?
It's the difference between building a model car and a car that can actually drive. Previous attempts, even those using soft robotics, have struggled to replicate the full complexity of the heart's motion, especially while maintaining realistic blood flow and pressure.
So it's not enough to just mimic the pumping.
No. The heart is constantly changing shape, contracting, twisting, and relaxing in a very specific way throughout the cardiac cycle. And this is where this new artificial LV really shines.
So how do they do it? What's the secret sauce?
The key is in the HFAMs and how they're arranged. Think about the muscles in your heart. You've got three main layers: the endocardium, transmural, and epicardium, each with muscle fibers running at specific angles.
Hold on, they recreated the muscle fiber angles too. Now that's commitment.
Precisely. This is based on the continuum model of cardiac muscle architecture, where the fiber angles change gradually across the heart wall. And get this, they even used a removable pin board during the fabrication process to hold the HFEMs at these precise angles.
So this pin board acts like a mold, ensuring those fibers are lined up just right.
Exactly. And they compare it to the role of the extracellular matrix in a real heart, which provides structure and influences those crucial fiber angles. This allows the new artificial heart to twist and contract in a way that previous models simply couldn't.
Okay, so we've got the structure down. But the heart's movement, that coordinated contraction and relaxation, that's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
It really is. So how did they go about recreating that complex dance of the heart muscle?
They took inspiration from, well, real hearts. They used data from canine heart muscle strain to control the artificial muscles.
So they basically gave the artificial heart a canine choreography lesson.
Exactly. They mapped out the precise movements of the canine heart muscle during each phase of the cardiac cycle. That's the contraction and relaxation phases. Remember those from biology class. You've got your isovolumetric contraction, ejection, isovolumetric relaxation, and rapid filling.
Okay, it's all coming back to me now.
Good, because they looked at how the heart's shape changes during each of those phases and used that data to direct the artificial muscles. And the results, let's just say the artificial heart nailed the routine.
You're going to have to give me some specifics. Did it actually move like a real heart?
It did. For instance, they were looking at something called long axis shortening. It's basically how much the heart squeezes top to bottom during contraction. The artificial LV achieved about 14 millimeters of shortening, which is right on par with physiological data.
Wow, okay. But was it just squeezing in a straight line, or did it have that twisting motion we were talking about earlier?
It did indeed, and this is where it gets really impressive. They observed a clockwise twist during the isovolumetric contraction phase, followed by a counterclockwise twist during ejection. And the degree of twisting, even the timing, lined up incredibly well with what you'd see in a healthy heart.
So it wasn't just pumping, it was doing the twist. Incredible. But a heart beating on its own is one thing. How do you test if it can actually function within a circulatory system?
Excellent point. To put it through its paces, they hooked the artificial LV up to what's called a mock circulation loop, or MCL.
A mock circulation loop, so like a simplified circulatory system.
You got it. It's basically a way to recreate the conditions the heart would encounter in a real body. They can control things like blood pressure and resistance, basically putting this artificial heart through a battery of tests.
Like a test track, but for hearts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on that test track, the artificial LV really delivered. It pumped against realistic pressures, achieved a healthy stroke volume, that's the amount of blood pumped with each beat, and maintained a normal ejection fraction.
Which basically tells you how efficiently the heart is pumping.
Got it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The researchers were able to use the MCL to simulate heart failure.
Wait, how do you simulate heart failure in an artificial heart?
It's all about controlling those artificial muscles. By limiting how much the muscles could contract, they essentially weakened the artificial heart. And what happened? The simulator's performance changed in ways that mirrored what you'd see in a real patient with a weakened heart.
So lower stroke volume, lower ejection fraction, that sort of thing.
Precisely. They even observed changes in pressure within the artificial heart that were consistent with heart failure. This means that the simulator could be used to not only understand how a healthy heart functions, but also to study how the heart behaves in different stages and types of heart disease.
That is incredible, and incredibly valuable from a research perspective.
Absolutely, and they didn't stop there. The researchers also wanted to see if they could use the artificial heart to test medical devices. Specifically, they looked at a device called an intra-aortic balloon pump, or IABP.
I'm not familiar with that one. What is an IABP and why test it on the artificial heart?
An IABP is designed to help hearts that aren't pumping efficiently. It's a balloon-like device that's inserted into the aorta and inflates and deflates in sync with the heartbeat. This helps to improve blood flow and reduce the workload on the heart.
Okay, so it's basically giving a struggling heart a little boost.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Exactly.
But how did they even incorporate an IABP into this whole artificial heart setup?
Well, they integrated a simplified version of the IABP into their mock circulation loop. Remember, that's the system that lets them mimic the conditions inside a real body.
Right.
So they could actually see how the artificial heart would respond to an IABP in real time.
And what did they find? Did it work like it was supposed to?
It did. The pressure changes they observed within the simulator, the way the artificial heart responded to the IABP inflating and deflating, it all lined up beautifully with what we'd expect to see in a real patient.
That's amazing. So not only can this thing mimic a healthy and failing heart, it can be used to study how medical devices interact with the heart too.
Exactly.
Wow.
And while this doesn't mean we're going to replace clinical trials with artificial hearts tomorrow, it's a big step towards more efficient and potentially more accurate preclinical testing.
I can definitely see why this is such a big deal.
Yeah.
But this is still research, right?
Right.
What are some of the limitations of the current design, and where do they see this tech heading in the future?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about yet is how the heart wall actually thickens during contraction.
Okay.
The current version of the artificial LV can change volume, but the wall itself stays the same thickness.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to replicate a handshake with a solid block of wood versus an actual hand with muscles that contract and relax. You're not going to get the same kind of grip or flexibility.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
And the researchers acknowledge this limitation.
Okay.
They're exploring new materials for the artificial muscles, materials that would allow for more natural thickening during contraction.
Interesting.
They're also working on more powerful drive systems to better control those subtle movements.
So giving this artificial heart a serious upgrade in both brawn and brains.
Exactly. But it goes even further than that.
Okay.
They're not just stopping at mimicking a generic heart.
Yeah.
They're talking about using medical imaging data, like CT scans and MRIs, to create patient-specific heart simulations.
Wait, back up.
Yeah.
Patient-specific. You mean an artificial heart that's tailored to an individual patient?
You got it. Imagine having a digital replica of your own heart that doctors could use to plan complex surgeries, test new devices, or even predict your risk of heart disease.
Okay, that's next level. But let's be realistic. How far off is this kind of personalized medicine?
It's hard to say for sure. This cutting-edge research, but the progress they've made even in the last few years is astounding.
Yeah.
This has the potential to change how we treat heart disease forever.
It sounds like we're on the verge of something really big.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Good.
Thank you for walking me through it.
My pleasure. Until next time.